Hare Krishna devotees, welcome to day 80 of our Bhakti Vaibhava seminar on Srimad Bhagavatam, third Canto. And we are in chapter 27, and chapter 27 is titled, let me just tell you, Understanding Material Nature. And we are in the last section from verse 21 to verse 30. Kapila explains that a devotee can become free through devotional service, verse 21 to verse 30. And at the end of the last section we went through just the verses. So now we'll go through the verses and the purports, and we'll see how long it takes us. It may not take us the full hour. It's quite possible, because it's just 10 verses with their purports. Okay, anyway, let's see how it goes. Okay, devotees, so let's begin. But first of all, let's recite our prayers. Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Srimati Bhakti Vedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharane Niravishesha Shunyavadi Pastuchade Jatarane Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivas Adi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Eva Cha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, one can get liberation by seriously discharging devotional service unto me, and thereby hearing for a long time about me or from me. By thus executing one's prescribed duties, there will be no reaction, and one will be freed from the contamination of matter. So there's a purport here. Sridhar Swami comments that by association with material nature alone, one does not become conditioned. That only happens after one is infected by the modes. And the principle that Prabhupada mentions is that if someone is in contact with the police, it doesn't mean that he is a criminal. As long as one doesn't commit some crime, even though there's a police department, he's not going to be punished. Yeah. So, right. Similarly, a liberated soul is not affected, although in the material nature. Right. And even for that matter, even the Lord associates with material nature when he comes. But of course, he's not affected. So, one has to act in such a way that in spite of being in material nature, one is not affected. I mean, you have to consciously make an effort to not be affected when you're trying to be Krishna conscious within the material nature. And an example which is given is the lotus. Although the lotus flowers in association with water, it doesn't mix with the water. So this is how one has to live, as Lord Kapila describes. Animita nimitena swadarame na malatmana. Right. So then there's a second paragraph of purport, and there's a third paragraph too, but the second paragraph, so one can be liberated from all these adverse circumstances, oh gosh, simply by seriously engaging in devotional service. So, how devotional service develops and becomes mature is explained here. So, first of all, in the beginning you have to do your prescribed duties with a clean mind, means Krishna conscious. So in other words, you have to do your prescribed duties in Krishna consciousness. So there's no necessity of changing one's prescribed duties. One simply has to act in Krishna consciousness. That's all. And in discharging your Krishna conscious duties, one should determine whether by his professional or occupational duties Krishna, the Lord, is satisfied. Prabhupada refers to the Bhagavatam 1-13, which says that everyone has some prescribed duties to do, but the perfection of such duties is achieved only if the Lord is satisfied with your activities. For example, Arjuna, what a good example. Arjuna's duty was fighting, and the perfection of his fighting, the perfection of his duty, was tested by the satisfaction of Krishna. Krishna wanted him to fight, and when he fought for the satisfaction of the Lord, that was the perfection of his professional, devotional duty. Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, on the other hand, when, contrary to the wish of Krishna, he was not willing to fight, that was imperfect. That, of course, was right at the beginning of Bhagavad Gita, first chapter, and a bit of the second chapter. He was not willing. So that was imperfect. Then third paragraph. So if we want to perfect our lives, we must do our duties for the satisfaction of Krishna. We have to act in Krishna consciousness, because when you do that, your activities will not produce any reaction. This is confirmed in Bhagavad Gita, that yagyartat karmanonyatra, that's chapter 3, verse 9, all activities should be performed simply for yagya or Vishnu. Yes, anything done otherwise without the satisfaction of Vishnu or yagya produces bondage. That's the science of it all. So Kapila is saying the same thing as is stated in Bhagavad Gita. So Kapila is prescribing that you can transcend material entanglement by acting in Krishna consciousness, which means seriously engaging in devotional service. And how to do that? You have to hear for long periods of time. Chanting and hearing is the beginning of devotional service. And of course, one should also associate with devotees and hear from them. about the Lord's appearance, activities, etc. And then there's a fourth paragraph. There are two types of scripture. One is spoken by the Lord, the other is spoken about the Lord and his devotees. Bhagavad Gita is the former and Srimad Bhagavatam is the latter. And you have to hear these repeatedly from reliable sources. And then you can become fixed in serious devotional service. So in this way you get free from Maya. And Bhagavatam says that hearing about the Lord cleanses the heart of all contamination caused by the three modes. So by continuous, regular hearing, contaminations of lust and greed diminish, and then one comes to goodness. And this is the stage of Brahman realization. So Srila Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, in this way one becomes fixed on the transcendental platform, remaining fixed on the transcendental platform is liberation from material entanglement. And on we go to verse 22. This devotional service has to be performed strongly in perfect knowledge and with transcendental vision. One must be strongly renounced and must engage in austerity and perform mystic yoga in order to be firmly fixed in self-absorption. Prabhupada begins the purport by saying that devotional service can't be done on the basis of material, emotional, mental concoction, just done blindly, emotionally, like that. It says here that, this verse says, devotional service has to be done in full knowledge, and by visualizing the absolute truth. So we can, if we develop our transcendental knowledge in this way, we can understand the absolute truth, and the result of that knowledge will be renunciation, which is, that renunciation. It's not just any renunciation, but it's renunciation on the basis of transcendental knowledge in Krishna consciousness. So Prabhupada says that renunciation is not temporary or artificial. It is very strong. And it's said that the development of Krishna consciousness can be understood by the proportionate detachment or vairagya, renunciation. In other words, if you don't give up material enjoyment, you're not advancing in Krishna consciousness. So in fact, Prabhupada makes the point, renunciation in Krishna consciousness is so strong that it cannot be deviated by any attractive illusion. So this is the point. You have to do devotional service in full tapasya, austerity. You have to fast on Ekadasis. You have to fast on the appearance days of Lord Krishna, Lord Ram, Lord Chaitanya, and others. There are many such fasting days. And yogena means being seriously absorbed in the self. And by development of knowledge, to understand your constitutional position in relation to the Lord. So Srila Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, in this way one becomes fixed in devotional service, and his faith cannot be shaken by any material allurement. verse 23. The influence of material nature has covered the living entity, and thus it is as if the living entity were always in a blazing fire. But by the process of seriously discharging devotional service, this influence can be removed, just as wooden sticks which cause a fire are themselves consumed by the fire. Right. So we have noted, and we should note, we can note, that Srila Prabhupada on quite a number of occasions over these last few chapters, 2 or 3 or something like that, has, instead of just saying that we must do the process of devotional service, what he has said on it's a number of occasions, that we must do the process of seriously discharging devotional service. So Prabhupada's really emphasizing that. It's an important point to note. So anyway, purport. Fire, interesting point. Fire is conserved in wood because the trees just stand out for years and years. They stand out in the sunshine, and the heat, the fire from the sunshine becomes conserved in the wood, and when the circumstances are favorable, fire is ignited and the fire just blazes out. But then the wood, which is the cause of the fire, is also consumed by the fire, if you know how to manage fires properly, that is. So similarly, the living entity's conditional life is due to his desire to lord it over material nature and to envy the Lord. So the main diseases are the person wants to be one with the Supreme Lord, this is diseased condition, or another diseased condition wants to become the Lord of material nature. So Prabhupada makes the interesting note, important note, the first disease, becoming one, that the Gyanis have that, and the second, lording it over material nature and supposedly enjoying, the Karamis have that. But of course, both these diseases are due to material contamination. So anyway, this can all this material contamination can be consumed by devotional service, because in devotional service, these two diseases are absent. Two diseases, wanting to become one with the Lord or wanting to become the Lord of material nature. They're not there in proper devotional service. Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, therefore the cause of material therefore the cause of material existence is at once consumed by the careful discharge of devotional service in Krishna consciousness. And on to the second paragraph, Prabhupada makes the point that a devotee in full Krishna consciousness is always working, always doing service here and there and busily engaged. But so people may think that, he's just a working person. But the inner significance of the devotee's activities is that they're meant for the satisfaction of the Lord. And this is Bhakti, devotional service. And of course the example is there of Arjuna. He was a warrior. But when by his fighting he satisfied the senses of Lord Krishna, then he became a devotee. I mean, he was already a devotee, of course, it's complicated, but his real devotion was brought out when he was fighting for the Lord and pleasing the Lord by doing that. So since a devotee also engages in philosophical study to understand the Lord as he is, so the devotee's activities may appear to be like those of a mental speculator, some impersonal philosopher. But actually he's trying to understand the spiritual nature and transcendental activities, Krishna's activities. So Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, thus, although the tendency for philosophical speculation exists, the material effects of fruitive activities and empiric speculation do not what? They don't exist, because this activity is meant for the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Verse 24, by discovering the faultiness of his desiring to lord it over material nature, and by therefore giving it up, the living entity becomes independent and stands in his own glory. You know, the thing is, in material life, because we're spiritual, we're not material. Therefore, how are we going to enjoy matter? Yeah, because there's this incompatibility between us and the material world. So therefore, our attempts to lord it over material nature, enjoy material nature, etc., they're ultimately doomed to failure, and they're frustrated. And then as a result of that frustration, he decides he wants to get more power than the ordinary living entity and then merge into the existence of the Lord. So what's he doing here? He's making a plan to get even more enjoyment than he would have got if he had been successful enjoying the material world and lording it over the material world as he was trying to do before. Because if you're God, you get all the enjoyment. So anyway, the second paragraph, when you're situated in devotional service, that's your independent position. People who are not so bright, not so intelligent, can't understand the position of the eternal servant of the Lord, because people have this thing about servant. It's kind of low class. Well, it's not high class to be a servant. But they don't understand that being a transcendental servant is much different and much better than being a servant in the material world. So Prabhupada makes the point, if one can understand this and can thus revive one's original nature of eternal servitorship of the Lord, one stands fully independent from Maya. And so Prabhupada goes on, living entities' independence is lost by material contact. Because when you have material contact, you become dependent on the modes and controlled by the modes, and it's just a very entangled situation. But in the spiritual field, there you have independence. So if you're really into the spiritual life and devotional service, there's no question of becoming dependent on the modes. Prabhupada concludes the paragraph by saying, this position is attained by a devotee, and therefore he gives up the tendency for material enjoyment after seeing its faultiness. So now there's a third paragraph. Prabhupada talks about the difference between a devotee and an impersonalist. Is that particularly the impersonalist tries to become one with the Lord so he can enjoy without impediment, whereas the devotee gives up completely the desire to enjoy and engages in devotional service. And in that way he becomes independent. When engaged in devotional service, that's the living being's constitutional, glorious position. And interesting point, at that time, the devotee becomes Ishvara, fully independent. Of course, the real Ishvara, or the Ishvara Parama, the Supreme Ishvara, Supreme Independent, is Krishna. But us, living entities, we can also become Ishvaras, independent, when we're engaged in devotional service. Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, in other words, transcendental pleasure derived from loving service to the Lord is actual independence. Verse 25. In the dreaming state, one's consciousness is almost covered, and one sees many inauspicious things. But when he's awakened and fully conscious, such inauspicious things cannot bewilder him. So that's interesting, isn't it? Yeah, so Prabhupada makes the point that while dreaming, you may see many unfavorable things which cause disturbance, anxiety. But when you're awake, you may still remember what happened in the dream, but you're not disturbed. So similarly, the position of self-realization, understanding our relationship with the Lord, it makes you completely satisfied, and the modes which are a cause of disturbance, they can't affect you. So yes, okay, in contaminated consciousness, a person sees everything for their enjoyment, but in pure consciousness, Krishna consciousness, one sees that everything is for the pleasure of the Lord. And Prabhupada says, that is the difference between the dreaming state and wakefulness. The dreaming state and wakefulness. Dreaming state means you're asleep, but not really deep sleep. And wakefulness means that you're awake and you're doing your regular daily program. So anyway, the contaminated consciousness is compared to the dream condition, dream consciousness. And Krishna consciousness is like the awake state. So the only absolute enjoyer is Krishna. And one who understands that Krishna is the proprietor and the enjoyer of everything, such a person is peaceful and independent. So, as long as you don't understand these things, the conditioned soul wants to enjoy everything and possibly become a humanitarian, open hospitals, schools, and otherwise enjoy life. It's all just a big illusion, because you can't really help anyone by these things. If you open a hospital, does that mean people are not going to get sick? I mean, you can say it's fair enough, that when people do get sick, if you open a hospital, you can have them cured, at least many of them, not all. But if you open a hospital, devotees and friends, does that mean people are never going to die or get sick? Of course not. So Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, if one wishes to benefit his fellow brother, he must awaken his dormant Krishna consciousness. The Krishna consciousness position is that of prati-buddha, which means pure consciousness. So devotees, we go on to verse 26. The influence of material nature cannot harm an enlightened soul, even though he engages in material activities, because he knows the truth of the Absolute, and his mind is fixed on the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So, in the verse, Lord Kapila is saying that Mai Manasam, a devotee whose mind is always fixed on the lotus feet of the Lord, is called Atmarama, or Vidita Tattva. All of these terms are in the verse itself. You can just have a look. You'll see them. So, Atmarama means one who rejoices in the self, or one who enjoys in the spiritual atmosphere. And Atma in a material sense means the body or the mind. But when we're referring to a person whose mind is fixed on the lotus feet of the Lord, then Atma is different, has a different meaning. So then Atma means one who's fixed in spiritual activities in relationship with the Supreme Soul. So that Supreme Soul, that's the Lord. And we, the individual souls, we're the living entities. So when we, the Lord and the souls, reciprocate in service, then the living entity is said to be Atmarama. This, Prabhupada makes the point, this Atmarama position can be attained by one who knows the truth as it is. The truth is that the Supreme Personality of Godhead is the enjoyer, and the living entities are meant for his service and enjoyment. So the paragraph is concluded that one who knows this and one who uses everything in the Lord's service escapes all reactions and all the influences of the modes. Isn't it great? It's wonderful. So there's a second paragraph here. So Prabhupada says that here we've got an example. Let's look at an example. That a materialist builds a big skyscraper and a devotee builds a big temple for the Lord. So superficially, these two builders, they look like they're on the same level because they're both getting different materials, wood, stone, iron, bricks, etc. But the difference is the person who's building the skyscraper is a materialist. The person who builds the temple is Atmarama. So the skyscraper man is trying to satisfy himself, but the devotee is trying to satisfy the Lord by his building. But otherwise, they're both very busy. But the devotee is liberated and the materialist is conditioned. This is because the devotee's mind is fixed on the Lord. And the non-devotee's mind is fixed on sense gratification. So if, Prabhupada makes the point, if while we're doing things, even if we're doing material things, if our mind is fixed on the lotus feet of the Lord, one will not become entangled or conditioned. Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, the worker in devotional service in full Krishna consciousness is always independent of the influence of material nature. So we go on to verse 27. When a person thus engages in devotional service and self-realization for many, many years and births, he becomes completely reluctant to enjoy any one of the material planets, even up to the highest planet, which is known as Brahmaloka. He becomes fully developed in consciousness. So Prabhupada begins, anyone engaged in devotional service is a devotee. But still, there is a difference between pure devotees and mixed devotees. So the mixed devotee does devotional service for the spiritual benefit of going to the kingdom of God. And in material existence, when a devotee is not completely purified, then the devotee, like mixed devotee, expects a few things, 3 things specifically. 1, material benefit from the Lord in the form of relief from material miseries. Secondly, wants material gain or advancement in knowledge of the relationship between the Lord and the living entity, or wants knowledge of the nature of the Lord. When he's transcendental to these conditions we just read, he's called a pure devotee. Then he doesn't engage in service to the Lord for any material benefit or understanding. The only interest he has is he loves the Lord and tries to satisfy him spontaneously. So, second paragraph, who is the highest example of this? Loving the Lord and spontaneously engaged in satisfying him. Who's the highest example? That's the gopis in Vrindavan. They're not interested in understanding Krishna. They just love him. And they just want to love him and just continue like that. That is pure devotional service. So unless you come to this standard of pure devotional service, there will remain a tendency to desire elevation to a higher material position. Like the mixed devotee may want comfortable life on a higher planet like Brahmaloka. So these are material desires, but eventually after many years, that mixed devotee develops Krishna consciousness and is no longer interested in any material elevation. Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, he does not even aspire to become a personality like Lord Brahma. All right, so we carry on to verses 28 and 29. They're combined. Lord Kapila says, my devotee actually becomes self-realized by my unlimited causeless mercy. And thus, when freed from all doubts, he steadily progresses towards his destined abode, which is directly under the protection of my spiritual energy of unadulterated bliss. That is the ultimate perfectional goal of the living entity. After giving up the present material body, the mystic devotee goes to that transcendental abode and never comes back. Okay, so now there's a substantial purport here. Anyway, yeah, it's fairly substantial. Let's just get into it. So, Prabhupada makes the point that actual self-realization means to become a pure devotee. Yeah, means that implies that there's a life full of devotion to the object of devotion, the Lord. So self-realization means understanding the Lord and the living entities. To know the self and exchanges of love between the living entities and the Lord, that's self-realization. But this cannot be attained by impersonalists or other transcendentalists. They can't understand the science of devotional service. So it's only by the Lord's unlimited causeless mercy that he reveals devotional service. It's described in this verse, well, in the first of the two verses, in the second line, mat prasadena. Mat prasadena means by my special grace. Yeah. So this is also confirmed in Bhagavad Gita. And only those who engage in devotional service with love and faith, only them get the necessary intelligence from the Lord to gradually advance to the abode of the Lord. Second paragraph. Prabhupada points out, Nishreyasa means the ultimate destination. Swasamsthana indicates the impersonalists have no particular place to stay. The impersonalists sacrifice their individuality to merge in the impersonal effulgence of the Lord, of the body of the Lord. But the devotee has a very specific abode. So the planets rest in sunshine, but the sunshine has no resting place. When you reach a planet, then you have a resting place. So that spiritual sky, known as Kaivalya, is simply blissful light all around, under the protection of the Lord. And in Bhagavad Gita chapter 14, verse 27, it's stated there that rests on the body of the Lord. The blissful light all around. And any special mercy rests on the body of the Lord. So anyway, in the spiritual sky, there are many spiritual planets. The highest is Krishnaloka. Some of the devotees go to Vaikuntha, some to Krishnaloka. Depends on their desire. And this is called swasamsthana. Swasamsthana, the desired destination. So by the mercy of the Lord, the devotee understands the destination even while here in the material world. So therefore he performs his devotional activities steadily, without doubting, and after leaving the body, goes to that destination. Prabhupada concludes the paragraph by saying, after reaching that abode, he never comes back to this material world. So we go on to a third paragraph. It's a shorter paragraph. So the words lingad vinirgame, which are here, they mean after being freed from the two kinds of material bodies, the subtle and the gross. Yeah. So the subtle body is made of mind, intelligence, false ego, and contaminated consciousness. And the gross body is made of earth, water, fire, air, and ether, the standard material elements. So when you go to the spiritual world, you give up both of these bodies. You enter the spiritual world in a pure spiritual body and become stationed on one of the spiritual planets. Okay. But the impersonalists, they may also, they don't always, but some may. They also reach the spiritual sky after giving up gross and subtle material bodies, but they're not placed on spiritual planets because their desire is different. They want to merge into the effulgence coming from the body of the Lord. So therefore they go into the Brahman effulgence, and they don't really have a place. They don't really have a place to stand like a base, something like that, you could say. So this word swasanstanam is significant. As the living entity prepares himself, so he attains the relevant abode. So the impersonalists, they go to the Brahman effulgence, but those who want to associate with the Lord in his transcendental form, doing devotional service, either Vaikuntha or Krishna Loka, they go there, and they don't return to this grotty material world. Verse 30, when a perfect yogi's attention is no longer attracted to the byproducts of mystic powers, which are manifestations of the external energy, his progress towards me becomes unlimited, and thus the power of death cannot overcome him. Okay. So now the yogis. Prabhupada comments on the yogis in the purport, that the yogis are usually attracted to the byproducts of mystic yogic power. Yeah, they want to get some powers. And Prabhupada gives 5 examples of the 8. They can become smaller than the smallest, greater than the greatest, achieve anything they desire, have the power even to create a planet, or bring anyone they like under their subjugation. Really. It's amazing, isn't it? Under their subjection, okay? So yogis who have incomplete information of devotional service, they're attracted by these powers. But they're material, they got nothing to do with spiritual progress. So the perfect yogi, his mind is not attracted by any material power, only attracted to the service of the Lord. And for a devotee, the process of merging into the Brahman effulgence, it's considered to be hellish. Yogic power, or the preliminary perfection of yogic power, means to be able to control the senses is automatically achieved by the devotee. As for elevation to higher planets, the devotee thinks this is just some sort of wild, weird hallucination. He only concentrates on loving devotional service, so death has no power over him. And Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, in such a devotional state, a perfect yogi can attain the status of immortal knowledge and bliss. So there you go, devotees. We have now completed 3rd Canto, chapter 27. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.